Meaning of life. What is it? I think it's one of the questions that will be remain unsolved as long as we live and as long as society exists until, climate change wipes us away. And it's a question that we started to grapple with for quite a long time. And there's always this division. Some people saw that there is this defining line prior to which people didn't really question their meaning of life. Whether it's because they're too busy trying to fend off lines that try to kill them, or is it because of the religious, the piousness, and the dedication that people had to these rituals that we followed because of religions? And if you do go back quite a while back, you can see philosophers talking about this. Kierkegaard, one of the renowned philosopher, brings this idea of the duality of leaping into faith. So what is this topic that keeps popping up? Leap into faith, leap off faith, and so on and so forth. To understand this idea, we kind of have to acquaint ourselves with this religious story about a man. Now in Islam, I believe he is Ibrahim alayhi salam, and Judaism and Christianity, I believe his name is Abraham. So Abraham gets a message from God while he was asleep, or whatever the case may be, that he needs to sacrifice his son in order to appease him. Now it kind of diverges, depends on which culture is telling the story. In some culture where I was born, it was said that he discusses this with his wife and his wife totally agrees. And however, in certain other cultures, there's no mention of this and they just simply take off. And in my culture, the son was very, very along and for the idea that in order to appease God, he needs to be able to sacrifice himself and be okay with it. In some other ways of telling the story, he was quite afraid and was not cooperating. But nonetheless, this is like somewhere in Middle East, so it's probably a desert that they go to, and he gets tied up, the son, and he was about to get his head cut off basically, and Abraham closes his eyes and swings, and then he opens his eyes and he sees his son was replaced by a insert some sort of animal. Some telling of the story talks about a camel, some talks about other things, but he gets basically replaced. The reason this story is so powerful is because Kierkegaard tried to use this story to tell you that you need to leap into faith. In order to find the meaning in life, you have to just have the trust into some greater idea that you cannot rationalize. Any rational man would be saying, this is a stupid idea. Why would I want to kill my son because I had a dream? And in order to understand religion or meaning of life, Kierkegaard proposes not necessarily either or, rational and irrational, but there's some sort of idea that doesn't confide within this two binary way of thinking. Maybe instead of rational and irrational, there's a irrational. Now moving forward, I think one of the more popular ideas about meaning of life comes from one of the most famous people, Nietzsche, and his ideas are quite popular. I think they're like Jordan Peterson, who keeps bringing him up, and a few other people, and most people probably quote Nietzsche as a misinterpretation than actually what he's trying to say. But his idea, the name to claim fame idea, was about how God is dead and we killed him. This isn't to necessarily say that God himself died, but the idea of it. As our culture grew out of, into modern society, postmodernism, we started to find other ways to not spend days in rituals that try to appease God. And we start to find answers in science of how things are, why should things be, and so on and so forth, which ended up replacing the need to have an excuse of why things are the way things are. And over time, this kind of erased the necessity of God in our lives, and hence the idea of that God is dead. But what are the consequences of this? And to that point of meaning of life, it kind of removed some points of why we exist. If our existence was to appease God, well, God no longer exists according to the way we live now. So what is the meaning of life? To this point, there's another philosopher, Heidegger, who is known for being a huge Nazi, just FYI. And he brings about this idea of Dasein, which is highly complicated. I barely understand it, but I think it does bring up some ideas of what life is and how it should be lived. Is by talking about how we perceive life and how events happen. To flesh it out a little bit more, we have to think from our perspective. What's an event that is totally unique just to us? But one thing that is totally unique to you, an event just to you, is death. Yeah, sure, people can know that you died, but nobody can ever know it prior hand of what's it like. And you only have one chance to feel it out. So what he suggests is that to look into your life and figure out what would you have wanted from your life at the point of your deathbed. So imagine you're dying right now, being in that position. What would you have wanted to have done in your life, and how would it look like if you wanted to live the way you wanted to live? Because only from that perspective you'd know, having that unique vantage point, so to speak, to have a clear understanding of how to live. But at that point, the meaning of life would do you no good.